All right, guys, I am wading into dangerous water in this episode, so I'm just going to say a couple of things to save myself, hopefully, from grief. I'm not a Trump supporter, nor am I a Biden supporter. I don't like Democrats. I don't like Republicans. I am as apolitical as they come these days, and this is not a political video. I don't have a larger political agenda behind this. I am a space supporter. And what has just happened could set space back by decades. All of that being said, please don't click off of this regardless of who you support. Hear me out and listen to what is about to happen to NASA unless we stop it. These are samples from Mars, methodically collected by the Perseverance rover for return to Earth so they can be scanned for the possibility of either ancient or existing bacterial life, something that could protect future astronauts from a Martian plague from infecting them, especially if that plague were to be brought to Earth someday. But if the Trump administration gets its way, this program is now dumped. Let's go ahead and move on to the Halo module for the Lunar Gateway and also the power and propulsion element for the Lunar Gateway, two crucial modules for a lunar space station that will serve a wide variety of purposes to support our future presence on the moon. We spent millions and millions of dollars on this project thus far, and it's almost ready to be deployed 2 years from now. Unfortunately, if the Trump administration gets its way, this too will be dumped. Now let's have a look at the Mobile Launch Platform 2. This, of course, like many things associated with SLS, has been plagued by a wide variety of difficulties, cost overruns, etc., but without it, we can't launch the newest version of the SLS moon rocket. But then again, let's just go ahead and dump this in spite of the millions that's been spent on it, and dump the moon rocket while we're at it as well. But none of us should be all that surprised that all of these things are going to get dumped on top of a lot of other projects, because NASA is about to get its budget slashed down to a level that they have not experienced since before the Apollo era. That's right, NASA has never had so little money to work with as they're going to have unless Congress puts a stop to this budgetary proposal from the Trump administration. And the worst thing of all, this budget does not cut a penny from the U.S. national deficit. Good morning, spaceflight enthusiasts, and welcome to a very angry episode of The Angry Astronaut. And as you can see, I am proudly, for once, wearing the SLS t-shirt from NASA. Let me tell you something. Even though I haven't been a fan of this rocket since I started this channel, it is currently the only human-rated system that can get out to cislunar space that works right now. And we are years away from having another alternative, but this budget is going to shut SLS down. It's going to shut Orion down. It's going to shut the Lunar Gateway down. When it comes right down to it, it's going to shut our return to the moon down. And let me tell you something. It's not going to help us get to Mars either, because it's cutting some very critical science regarding the red planet that's going to be important for the safety of astronauts in the future. Not only that, just not enough money is being allocated towards a potential Mars mission to make that much of a difference anyway. Instead, NASA is getting the deepest cut to its budget in history. If the Trump administration gets its way, by the time it's done with NASA, it will have less money to work with than ever before, until perhaps before the Apollo era, before John F. Kennedy gave it a huge budget increase in order to get to the moon. I don't know what makes anybody think that a massive budget cut from a budget that was already a lot less than Apollo would possibly get us to the moon in anything resembling a reasonable time frame, or frankly, get us to the moon at all. So what exactly is happening here? I mean, why is NASA getting slashed like this? Well, obviously, Trump has talked a lot about reducing the budgets of a variety of different government agencies to get rid of waste in order to get the deficit down. At least that's the idea. But here's the problem. This budget proposal doesn't reduce the deficit at all, not by 1 penny. Yesterday, the Trump administration released its proposed 2026 skinny budget, laying out in broad strokes how it plans to allocate funding across federal agencies in the coming fiscal year. Reports had suggested that NASA would take it on the chin, and that is indeed the case. This budget slashes NASA funding by $6 billion compared to enacted 2025 levels, from $24.8 billion to $18.8 billion, a cut of 24%. That would be the biggest single-year cut to NASA funding in American history. And by the way, if you look at the history of NASA's budget as a percentage of the overall U.S. federal budget, it's been going down year after year anyway, and this is going to take it down to a level that we haven't seen since the 1950s. Now, if you just want to talk about raw adjusted dollars, the last time NASA's budget was this low was 40 years ago, and we weren't going to the moon in the mid-1980s. And let me tell you something, we're not going to the moon with this budget either. The cuts are especially deep for space science, earth science, and legacy human exploration systems, which will be slashed by $2.3 billion, $1.2 billion, and nearly $900 million, respectively. NASA's sustainable aviation programs will also come to an end. In other words, the whole idea of bringing supersonic transport back to humanity, well, so much for that. And the administration's budget would ensure continued elimination of any funding towards misaligned DEIA initiatives. Okay, whatever. Maybe that's a good idea. I'm not going to get into that. If this budget is enacted, and that's a big if, as it must be approved by Congress, some big-ticket NASA programs will get the axe. It must be approved by Congress, meaning that this can still be stopped. And I'm going to tell you later on how we can do that. But let's continue. Among them are Mars Sample Return, a joint effort with the European Space Agency to get material collected by NASA's Perseverance rover back to Earth. Let's talk about the importance of that mission. We're going to be sending humans to Mars at some point. Chances are, right now, it looks like Elon Musk and whatever ideas he has are going to put humans on the surface of Mars, because if all of this nonsense goes through, NASA definitely won't be doing it, and I doubt they're going to be a big part of it either. Now, one of the most important parts of the Perseverance mission that we spent billions of dollars on, by the way, was to collect samples from across the surface of Mars and deposit them in various locations to be collected by a sample return mission in the future. And in these samples are critical information about what sort of life there might be on Mars and what sort of varieties that life might come in. If you watch my channel, you know that I believe that there is abundant bacterial life on the red planet. There's lots of evidence to suggest that that is the case. And if SpaceX astronauts go traipsing into that environment without any knowledge of what they're getting into, it might be the equivalent of a CDC worker walking into a hot zone without any protection. And if these astronauts bring this bacteria back, because sometimes these things can lie dormant inside a human body for months or even years, they could potentially unleash a plague on this planet when they return. Unless, of course, they had some sort of quarantine center, preferably orbiting the Earth or orbiting an entirely different planet, to get tested on first and to test whatever bacteria they might be carrying in their bodies. But guess what? That's going to get cut too. So we're going to be sending astronauts into this potentially dangerous biological environment without any sort of study being carried out beforehand. That's the first major drawback to these cuts. Now let's continue with the Lunar Gateway, that quarantine area that I was just talking to you about. The Gateway is a lunar space station designed to support a permanent presence on the lunar surface. It provides a transition point for missions that are delivered by the SLS out to cislunar space, whereby astronauts can stay on the Lunar Gateway, sometimes control robots in real time on the lunar surface, a variety of different tasks that they can carry out while on the space station, and then ferry astronauts back and forth to the lunar surface with reusable landers without those landers having to go all the way back to Earth. In addition to that, it serves as a test bed for a mission to Mars. The Lunar Gateway is very similar to an interplanetary spacecraft. It has its own propulsion system, it has habitation units, it has laboratories, that sort of thing, meaning that on a 6-month mission to the moon, astronauts can simulate a mission to Mars. They will be subjected to the same type of cosmic rays and solar radiation because the space station will not be protected by the Earth's magnetic field. They'll have the same limited supply and isolation issues, but if something goes seriously wrong, well, a rescue mission can be sent from Earth, so we can learn about the potential pitfalls of an interplanetary journey without having to go on that journey. But get rid of the Gateway and you get rid of that advantage, meaning that Mars missions and the astronauts on those missions will be doing all of this for the first time with no rescue being possible. In addition, the Gateway can serve as a quarantine lab for any missions coming back from Mars that can rendezvous with the space station first, have the astronauts thoroughly tested for any bacteria they might have brought back, and also to study that bacteria in a very safe and isolated environment before those potentially hostile life forms are brought back to Earth. But guess what? This budget gets rid of all of that. Ready for more? Well, too bad, because there's a whole lot more. Quote, the budget phases out the grossly expensive and delayed Space Launch System rocket and Orion capsule after 3 flights. SLS alone costs $4 billion per launch and is 140% over budget. The budget funds a program to replace SLS and Orion flights to the moon with more cost-effective commercial systems that would support more ambitious subsequent lunar missions. What commercial system are we talking about here? Now, granted, I don't believe that SLS is the rocket of the future. It is a very expensive rocket. It is expendable. It is inefficient, but it also works. 3 years ago, before SLS took its first flight, I used to be a big advocate of replacing SLS with Starship. But now that this rocket has proven itself quite decisively, well, here's the difference between what these current systems have accomplished. This is what Orion has accomplished thus far, and right now, there's only one other human-rated interplanetary system in the works, and this is where that system is at the moment. Building a comprehensive human-rated spacecraft that can go all the way to the moon is no easy task, and it's not a cheap task either. And if we're going to get rid of the only spacecraft that's capable of doing the job right now and replace it with something else, how long is that going to take, and how much can we expect it to cost? Orion has a life support system capable of sustaining 4 astronauts for at least 28 days. Crew Dragon can't do that. Starliner can't do that. Nothing can do that except for Orion right now. And as you saw, Starship is not really at the point to where anybody's going to be comfortable in putting 4 astronauts inside the fairing of that rocket, lighting it up on the ground, and then trying to safely return it to Earth. Starship is a long way away from being a comprehensive solution for the whole thing. And if you wanted to only take care of part of the mission and then have another human-rated spacecraft take care of the rest, well, there's a problem with that as well. Even with a full tank of fuel, Starship is incapable of going all the way to the surface of the moon and then all the way back and re-entering Earth orbit. There's too much delta V in the equation. If Starship's going to do the whole job, that means it has to come plunging back from the moon and re-enter the atmosphere with no orbital precautions taken beforehand. That is a very dangerous solution, especially given where we are right now. And then, if we want to talk about another potential solution, build another human-rated spacecraft that could do the job, well, this is all Blue Origin has at the moment, just a CGI drawing and perhaps some initial engineering plans, so they're nowhere close to having something that can do the entire job for us. And if you try to fund something completely new, well, consider the Commercial Crew Program. It began in 2011, and the first flight didn't take place until 2020. 9 years and billions of dollars invested in development. And by the way, all the developmental costs for SLS, nasty and horrible and as expensive as they were, well, all of that is done. Now all you have is operational costs, which are substantially less than what has been paid to SLS up to this point. And also you need to consider all of the things that are going to be tossed on the scrap heap as a result of canceling this program. ML2, for example, Mobile Launch Tower 2, necessary to launch the upgraded and, in my opinion, much more efficient version of SLS. That goes on the scrap heap, along with the universal stage adapter that allows SLS to carry a considerable amount of cargo, or perhaps a reusable lander of some kind in the same mission that they carry an Orion capsule with astronauts on board. In other words, a lot more bang for your buck with SLS than we're getting right now, but that goes on the scrap heap as well, even though so much money has been invested in it and it's totally complete and ready for testing. And the estimate of $4 billion per launch is actually a gross understatement. And the reason for that is, if you add in all the money that's been invested in developing SpaceX, plus the $4 billion per launch, and you only launch it 3 times, Artemis 1 through Artemis 3, as the proposal states, that means we're going to be paying $10.6 billion per launch, not 4. And the more times you launch SLS, the more the price goes down. Again, I'm not suggesting that this is what we should do in the long term, but until Starship looks a lot better than it does right now, we don't have a better alternative for reaching the moon before China does. Now, of course, we probably will reach the moon before China does with Artemis 3, and then after that, it will be like Apollo minus, as if we had Apollo 11 land on the moon and then stop there. No Apollo 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, all of those totally canceled if we did things the way Trump is trying to do them now. But all of these cuts pale to insignificance compared to the science cuts that the Trump administration is proposing for NASA. A 2/3 cut to astrophysics, down to only $487 million. By the way, that's things like James Webb and also the Hubble Space Telescope, these amazing discoveries that have been made with those instruments, all of that getting cut. A 50% cut to heliophysics. In other words, our study of the sun. You know, that thing that sends out coronal mass ejections that could theoretically shut down our entire power system for our planet, perhaps for months, plunging us into a worldwide crisis and food shortage. And then, of course, you have a cut to earth science, more than 50%, because after all of that global warming stuff, well, that's just made up. And what about programs to track dangerous asteroids and also to identify new asteroids that could potentially threaten our planet and wipe out our civilization? That comes under space science as well. Well, maybe with any luck, one of these asteroids will plop right on top of Mar-a-Lago. Okay, so we've gone over all the different parts of NASA, all the different programs, everything that is going to get slashed. We've gone over why getting rid of SLS at this point, until we're sure that Starship is going to be an effective human-rated replacement for SLS, is actually available, until we're sure that this rocket is ready to go. Well, not a great idea to get rid of the only moon rocket that works right now. But all of that aside, I mean, isn't all of this necessary? I mean, we all know how massive the budget deficit actually is. Trillions and trillions of dollars that the United States will never be able to pay back. Generation after generation is going to be saddled with this. And by the way, this entire budget is talking about discretionary spending, the spending that we can control. There are certain types of non-discretionary spending, for example, the deficit and the interest on the deficit, which is an enormous percentage of the overall budget. That's not discretionary. Those are mandatory expenditures that the U.S. needs to shell out every single year because of this damn deficit. Isn't it worth it to cut government spending in order to reduce the deficit? Well, let's have a look at this budget, line item by line item, and see if it reduces the deficit at all. Spoiler alert, it doesn't. So what do we get for slashing all of this money from NASA's budget? Well, not a whole lot, because this budget includes as many increases to government spending as it includes cuts. For example, things called the America First Opportunity Fund, $2.9 billion. The Development Finance Corporation, $2.8 billion. Perhaps those are good programs, but it's still an increase to government spending. And there are many, many things that are getting some pretty significant cuts in budget. For example, the Preserve Title I and Streamline K-12 programs, over $4.5 billion worth of cuts for education-related programs. Again, a lot of this stuff being returned to the state. I'm not going to make any statements as to whether or not this is a great idea, although $729 million being cut from adult education, I can't say that that's something I'm excited about. But then there's something called Make America Healthy Again that receives a budget of $500 million. Again, as many increases as there are cuts. But here's the main thing that makes all of these budget reductions completely useless. The Trump administration is proposing a $43.8 billion increase for the Department of Homeland Security. That increase alone could almost fully fund two NASAs, let alone one. And that's just an increase to the Department of Homeland Security. And then to add on top of that, the Department of Defense is slated to get an increase of $119.3 billion on top of the enormous budget that they already have, bringing the total budget to over $1 trillion. The increase alone would be enough to fully fund 4 NASAs and then some. And that's at NASA's current budget. So if you take all of this into account, the 2026 discretionary budget is $1.613 billion, which is exactly the same as the 2025 discretionary budget. No savings whatsoever. Now, look, I understand that there are many, many people who watch my channel that are big MAGA people who support Trump and his ideas, his objectives, etc. This isn't about politics. I didn't like Biden either, let me tell you. I don't like the Democrats. I'm not a fan of any political party. What I am a fan of is spaceflight, space science, and science in general. And this budget is no good for any of those things. Granted, NASA doesn't spend their money very effectively. They have been wasteful in the past. Something needs to be done about that. But a 25% budget cut, reducing NASA's budget to a level that it's never been at least not since the early 60s. We're talking about adjusted dollars here, by the way, guys. NASA has never worked with so little money as what is being proposed here. This has to stop. This is not the answer. This is going to shut spaceflight down. This not only hurts NASA, it also hurts private companies associated with NASA, including startups like SpaceX. SpaceX would not have succeeded if it had not been for NASA. After 3 consecutive failures of Falcon 1 until they finally got it off the ground, SpaceX didn't have enough money to continue. They were on the verge of bankruptcy. If it wasn't for a massive investment from NASA, they would have failed. How much money do you think NASA is going to have to invest in the next SpaceX, in the next startup that wants to offer an innovative and less expensive method to get humans or equipment or satellites, anything like that, into space, or other innovative solutions that could catapult mankind out into the solar system? Well, not very much. As a matter of fact, less money than they've ever had. And if you like spaceflight, if you like space at all, then this is not something that you should be supporting, regardless of your politics. As a matter of fact, if you are a MAGA person, this is the time to make your voice heard. Let the Trump administration know that even though you may support his policies overall, this is an enormous mistake. And I have all of the contact information in the description as to how you can contact your senator, your congressman, the White House, because this is not a done deal, as I mentioned before. This is not over. This is just the president's budgetary request. Congress needs to approve all of this, and now is the time to stop this, to fight this any and every way we can. Thank you very much for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and please continue to support this channel if you can. All the details about that are also in the description. I just released a new exclusive video to the Patreon library, a growing library of exclusive content available to Patreon subscribers for as little as $3 a month. If that's something you'd like to support, again, all the details in the description. So until next time, I urge all of you to stay angry about space.